We are just 1 week away from the NFL season, the fantasy football season being wrapped up, and we thought we'd give you guys a very good snapshot here of how we want to approach this offseason from a dynasty perspective. You guys know on this channel, we love to rebuild dynasty teams. So today we're breaking down our top 25 Cornerstone Dynasty rankings. These are players under the age of 25. So if you guys don't see your favorite player on here, just do a quick Google search. How old is this guy? If he's over 25, he is not going to show up here. These are the Cornerstone Dynasty rankings that you guys can do and build these foundational teams that eventually win multiple championships. These are the types of players we're going after, and we're going to rank them here and talk about where we have them in startups and, trade value and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and again, this is the cream of the crop. This is the guys that will be going in the first round, the second round, the third round of a lot of your startup drafts. And as you guys can see there on the left side, we do have an approximate valuation for what we'd pay for them after a startup.
Yeah, and just given the way that we like to rank players and like how we like to build our teams out of startups, these 25 players are all inside our top 40 to 45 overall players. Like, we are not the types of people that usually like to grab a 29-year-old running back in the third round of a startup. Like, we're usually building for the long term, taking young quarterbacks, taking young wide receivers, getting the cream of the crop at running back and tight end, that type of thing. So let's get things kicked off. And we have these guys kind of ranked based on how we would value them in a trade. And our dynasty trade value chart is undergoing a big update here. So if you guys do want to, see more information on how these guys should be valued, definitely check that out. The link down below for that is on flockfantasy.com. And all of our dynasty rankings are now up to date. And of course, we're going to have rookie content coming very soon as well. So the first round startup guys: Ja'Marr Chase, Jayden Daniels, Drake Maye. This is from a super flex standpoint, of course. These guys are all valued kind of in the 3 first rounders plus territory. Basically, it's going to cost you your firstborn to trade for these guys.
Yeah, and for a reason. I mean, they're all stud assets that have appreciability and just stick out at some of the most important positions. For Ja'Marr Chase, not really much to explain here. He's having a legendary level wide receiver season. He's leading the league in receiving touchdowns, obviously tethered to Joe Burrow. He's going to be the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL after this offseason. There's not much else to say when it comes to Ja'Marr Chase. He is my third overall player in startups. The only 2 guys I would take ahead of him would be Josh Allen, would be Lamar Jackson, the top 2 MVP candidates.
And he is, for what it's worth, barely under 25. So he almost didn't make this list because he's almost too old to make this list, but he is still barely under 25, so he did qualify. Jayden Daniels also, I don't think, would really shock too many people that we have him this high. He is currently my 5th overall player in startup rankings. Only Ja'Marr Chase, Justin Jefferson, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson ahead of him. So with Jayden Daniels, you're looking at a guy that he's having a 20-plus point per game season his rookie year. And the reason for that, I mean, we just saw it. He had 5 touchdowns and 80 rushing yards against the Philadelphia Eagles. He's a dual-threat quarterback. Nobody should be shocked that he's this high. It is very difficult to go and trade for Jayden Daniels right now because you have a young quarterback who in his rookie season probably going to win Offensive Rookie of the Year, probably going to finish as a top 3 to 5 quarterback in fantasy. And for the next 8-10 years at least, I mean, he's a slight guy. Maybe he starts dealing with injuries like Lamar did kind of midway through his rookie contract towards the end of it. But honestly, you can't predict that stuff of happening. So just for now, even just with Terry McLaurin as his number 1 receiver, he's producing like an elite quarterback. If they give him Luther Burden or Emeka Egbuka to go along with Terry McLaurin, or they go sign another receiver, they go get a difference-making, tight end. I mean, they drafted Sinnott in the mid-rounds last year. But regardless, I mean, Jayden Daniels basically has nowhere to go but up at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, 6th overall player for me, 5th overall player for you. I think people pretty much expect him to be valued in that 3 first rounders plus tier. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but the guy that will ruffle some feathers, and I already know there's already people in the comments, how do you guys have Drake Maye in the 3 first rounders plus tier? Drake Maye is the ultimate do-you-know-ball test of any dynasty asset right now. With Drake Maye, we're looking at objectively the worst situation in the NFL. His best receivers at this current point. I like Pop Douglas. He's a fine wide receiver 3, slot wide receiver. Kayshon Boutte is a wide receiver 4 on a real NFL football team. They have the worst offensive line in the league. And this is a guy in 11 starts. We've seen 200-plus passing yards per game, 14 passing touchdowns, 10 interceptions, which, by the way, if you actually watch the games, you'd realize probably 3 or 4 of those are completely not on him, like tip passes, popping up in the air. Like, there's a lot of context to Drake Maye's season. And on top of that, you're also getting a guy that in 11 starts, 389 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. But the reason why he ranks this far up is We both think he has superstar top 5 level talent if he's able to actualize it. And we're getting a potential situation this offseason where he can actualize it. The Patriots have the most cap space in the NFL. They have what's going to be presumably a top 3, top 4 NFL draft pick. If they go out this offseason and they sign a T. Higgins, or they sign offensive line help, or they draft a Ted McMillan, he is going to be the fastest rising asset in all of Dynasty. We want to be ahead of the curve. This is where we'd value him. Typically, in a lot of your leagues, maybe the valuation is closer to where the Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, Caleb Williams range is. For us personally, we think Drake Maye is on a superstar level trajectory. If there's any quarterback, young quarterback in the league right now that we can say after this upcoming next year is the next Josh Allen, I think it's Drake Maye.
The easiest explanation I can give to people who think this is too high for Drake Maye, a first-round caliber asset, a top 12 pick, the guy, first of all, is producing like a QB1. Since he's been the starter, he has 17.9 points per game, which is currently the quarterback 12 in that stretch. And it's higher than the likes of Tua Tagovailoa, elite weapons, Jordan Love, Caleb Williams, who was drafted ahead of him, Kyler Murray, Justin Herbert. Like, he's out-producing these guys with nothing. Absolutely nothing. Pop Douglas is a bum compared to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and some of the guys that these guys are throwing to. So yeah, they're going to add some pieces. We're projecting a little bit, but it's not like we're stretching the needle really far right now. He's already producing. It's not like we just saw a couple nice throws and we're like ready to put this guy in the first round. He runs the ball too, man. Like, he has like every game except for 2 this year, and one of them he left with a concussion. He's rushed for like 30 plus rushing yards as well.
Yeah, no, and it's funny too, because we actually got reports from, I believe it was Gerard Mayo, if not the owner, Robert Kraft, that basically said like, yo, we're out of the playoffs. We're not going to be running Drake Maye right now. That's at the end of the season. His rushing numbers could be even better if they are in contention. And again, this is a New England team that will have a high draft pick. Like I said, whether it's Travis Hunter, whether it's Ted McMillan, whether it's the best offensive lineman on their board, you're getting a piece with that top 5 pick to upgrade for Drake Maye. And on top of that, I mean, like I said, they are the heaviest rumored team to go after T. Higgins. What if we leave this offseason and they have T. Higgins and Ted McMillan on the outside, Demario Douglas in the slot, Hunter Henry at tight end, maybe you add, second and third rounders / sign some offensive linemen in free agency. This has the opportunity to be the most improved offense in the league. And I'm telling you right now, like, if they do what I think they can in this offseason, he will be my favorite long shot MVP bet.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, you don't get young quarterbacks doing this. It would have shocked nobody. Not one of us. If he had Bryce Young's rookie season, if he had Zach Wilson's rookie season, if he looked terrible as a rookie, but instead he basically did what CJ Stroud did to the Texans, rise all tides. And again, the ceiling was capped for those guys because at least Collins was talented. At least Tank Dell was talented. All the guys that Stroud was able to elevate the talent of as a rookie. Drake Maye turned, below average backups into like maybe adequate NFL starters to some degree. Like, he was working with nothing, man. Like, I've been so impressed with what he's done as a rookie. He's producing from a fantasy perspective. Yeah, he looks like a rookie quarterback at times, but I mean, like, it's not like he has Kevin O'Connell coaching him either. Like, there's nothing here at the moment that gives you excitement, yet he's still producing and still looks good.
Yeah, the best way I can sum it up, again, I'm not going to go out there and say, oh yeah, Jacoby Brissett is a world beater of a quarterback. That's not what I'm implying. But we have seen Jacoby Brissett be a solid bridge quarterback. And you would think for a young, raw rookie quarterback that maybe the trusty vet would have had a better year when he was starting. In 6 starts for Jacoby Brissett, he had 2 touchdown passes and a 43.6 QBR. Drake Maye in 11 starts has 14 touchdown passes and a 60 QBR as a freaking raw rookie quarterback.
Yeah. We don't have to glaze Drake Maye anymore, but we had to rationalize why we have him as a first-round asset. And if you guys are doing startups now, or if you're doing startups shortly after the season, he's going to go at the 2-3 turn, or maybe in the mid to late 3rd round, based on some of the projections that a lot of people are going to have. And like you said, he has a chance to be the fastest rising young quarterback in Dynasty, a real difference-making super flex type of asset, which is why we have him ranked in the 1st round already. So we can move down to the 1-2 turn, maybe 2nd round caliber assets here. And no disrespect to a lot of these guys. It's more so just like at their respective positions, they're slightly better options. We have a disagreement as far as like which wide receiver from the 2024 class is the wide receiver 1 as of right now. I have it as Malik Nabers, because with Malik Nabers, you've seen basically, I've talked about this stat before. He has one game this year without 8 or more targets. It's just simply a matter of him getting a competent quarterback, a competent offense. I think Brian Daboll is a good coach, but he's probably going to get fired this year, and they're probably going to bring in a whole new staff and a whole new regime. Yet, Malik Nabers is the wide receiver 10 since week 4. Like, that's insanely impressive for a guy who just has not been blessed with anything really to work with. He's like the wide receiver version of Drake Maye for me.
Yeah, and for reference, and I love Malik Nabers, him and the other guy that we're going to be talking about, which again, spoiler alert, you guys can see him on the screen right next to Malik Nabers. It's not really a hot take to have, but they've been so damn good as rookies. And another point to Malik Nabers here, 154 targets on the year. He is averaging 12 targets per game. For reference, Michael Thomas in his record-breaking year, 11.7 targets per game. Cooper Kupp in his record-breaking year, 11.6 targets per game. The Giants looking like a shoe-in to potentially get either Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders. Again, no ill will to Malik Nabers. I think he is on a stud trajectory, and I think when it's all said and done, we could be talking about him up there with Ja'Marr Chase. But I do have Brian Thomas Jr. ahead of him because what we're seeing from Brian Thomas Jr. right now, of rookie wide receivers in NFL history, 2 of them have gone over 1,100 plus yards and 9 plus receiving touchdowns already. Brian Thomas will end up being the third. The other 2, Ja'Marr Chase, Odell Beckham Jr. Brian Thomas Jr. legitimately as a rookie raw wide receiver already looks like Nico fucking Collins. We're talking about a 22-year-old wide receiver that is on track for a 1,300-yard, 10-plus receiving touchdown year. And again, people will hate on Trevor Lawrence. Oh, he's been banged up. He hasn't played as well. Trevor Lawrence is a much more known quantity than any rookie quarterback that can go to New York. So that would be a little bit of a tiebreaker for me at the quarterback situation. And on top of that, I mean, we're talking about since the bye week, 12 targets, 14 targets, 13 targets for Brian Thomas Jr., 86 receiving yards, 105 receiving yards, 132 receiving yards, and 3 total receiving touchdowns in that stretch. Like I said, he looks like a young Nico Collins, which is why I'm ranking him aggressively. And as you know, I love my Nico Collins.
Yeah, so this is a subjective take, and I think it's definitely fair to prefer Trevor Lawrence to whatever quarterback the Giants are going to get. Malik Nabers couldn't drink alcohol legally at his first training camp and has a top 10 season in PPR points per game right now. To me, that is insanity with the quarterback and the team that he plays with. That points to the fact that midway through his second season, we could be talking about bar none the wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. So that's the difference for me, is that I think both of these guys have wide receiver 1 upside in Dynasty, to be honest. But I think it's more likely with Nabers, because the other part too is because they're not even done their rookie seasons yet. Nabers was the second highest prospect in the history of the FSE prospect model, and Brian Thomas was more of a coin flip, boomer bust, good prospect, but not nearly as good as Nabers. All we know for sure is that they're feeding these LSU cats something different.
All I'm going to say is, whether you prefer Nabers, whether you prefer Brian Thomas Jr., guys, just know that you want one of these fucking guys on your Dynasty team.
And they're both ahead of Harrison for us right now, for what it's worth. As much as Harrison was ahead of them before the season started, they've done way too, like, it's not that Harrison's rookie season has been terrible, but it has not been nearly as impressive as these 2.
Not even remotely. And in fact, I mean, we'll talk about a different rookie wide receiver that we should be considering in a tier with Marvin Harrison Jr. in a second.
Yeah. So speaking of rookie players, not rookie wide receivers, and a guy who we could probably spend 3 to 4 hours glazing as well, Brock Bowers is the tight end 1 in fantasy right now as a rookie, which is an insane feat, considering that last year we saw the best rookie tight end season of all time with Sam Laporta. He was great. He was a top 5 or top 3 tight end in redraft that year, but he ran a little bit hot on touchdowns. He wasn't nearly the target dominator that Brock Bowers has been this year. When you have a 37% target share as a 21-year-old rookie, that is just irrefutably the tight end 1 in Dynasty, and it's not close.
Let's clarify this right now, by the way. If Malik Nabers is the next OBJ, Brian Thomas Jr. the next AJ Green, Brock Bowers the next Travis Kelce. Well, however you want to form your team, take one of these 3 and you're going to be in a good spot.
You could make the argument Bowers should be ahead of those guys just because Bowers doesn't exist at his position. At least with Nabers and Brian Thomas, there's Jefferson, there's Chase, there's Lamb, there's Collins, there's St. Brown, there's London, there's Puka, there's all these other great wide receivers. I mean, other than Trey McBride and Sam Laporta, if he gets back to his rookie season form, like there is nobody getting anywhere remotely close to Brock Bowers, including even some of these great tight end prospects we have in 2025. Yeah. I would venture a guess to say that it should cost you at least a first and a second more than any other tight end in
Dynasty. I would
say
2 ones.
It's honestly, like he is that much farther ahead of McBride to my tight end too. And McBride is great, but he is that much further ahead for me.
Like in all honesty, like when we're looking at these tiers, maybe the first tier should say 4 first rounders and this tier should say 3 first rounders plus. Because I'm looking at it, like you said, I would need 2 ones to move and McBride to move off of Bowers at this point. I would.
Yeah, you could definitely make that argument. Again, we could spend all day talking about how great all these guys are. Puka Nacua, we could probably move on to as well, who fits his way into this next tier, or he's in this tier with these guys. I'm not quite as sold on Nacua being in the same range as Nabers and Thomas Jr., but honestly, they're all great. They all have great merit to them. Puka Nacua, you pull up his numbers, and he's been an 18.4 PPR point per game producer as a second-year player after having a top 10 season last year with Cooper Kupp on the field. All doing this with a aging quarterback, and McVay hopefully will be there for the long term, because we heard rumblings that he would retire, but then it sounds like he had a reset and he, figured some things out. Regardless, I think Nacua is a little bit more situationally dependent than Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Nabers. That being said, his situation with the coaching staff that he's working with is better than both of theirs right now, and probably for the foreseeable future as well.
How you view Amon St. Brown, you view Puka Nacua, in my opinion. Like that is the situation for them. Again, you can make the case pure talent-wise. Oh, Malik Nabers is so much more talented. Oh, Brian Thomas Jr. is so much more talented. Oh, Nico Collins so much more talented. But like the situation does matter. Like Amon St. Brown. Is he better than CeeDee Lamb? Is he better than Ja'Marr Chase? Is he better than Justin Jefferson? No. But because he's in the situation, in the role that he's playing, he's going to be valued extremely highly, and he's an asset that you want. With Puka Nacua, the other untapped upside here is, what if they move on for Cooper Kupp this offseason?
Yeah, they definitely could. There's possibility for any one of these like first 8 to 9 dynasty wide receivers to really, at least produce stretches of pacing the rest of the position in production, if not having full seasons of doing it, like we're seeing from Ja'Marr Chase right now.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, Puka Nacua, not much else we have to say here. 86.1 yards per game this year, specifically since he came back from injury. The guy has been on a tear. So I do think we can move on to Bijan Robinson, the final member of this tier of the 3 first rounders tier. And that's simply because what he's doing from a productive standpoint, what we can project moving forward, and ultimately just the talent that he represents, I think he's got to be here. The other factor too, man, we saw how this offense was operating with Kirk Cousins all year without a real true threat of a passing game. First game with Michael Penix. Look what Bijan Robinson did.
Yeah, he had 24.3 PPR points. And back in week 6, people panicked on Bijan. They're like, man, Algier is way, way too involved right now. Bijan, of course, what was he like, running back 15 in points per game as a rookie after everybody thought he was going to be like a legendary player or whatever? We're seeing it, fellas. Like, a guy's only 22 years old. We wanted him to do it immediately. He didn't quite do it immediately. It took him about a year.
He's a year 2 player, man. Like,
he's a year 2 player. He got a quarterback, at least. I mean, as bad as Cousins was at times, he was still an upgrade over Ritter, who he had his rookie season. And now with Penix, man, who knows what this offense can do. He is a tier ahead of the rest of the running back position until Ashton Jeanty is an NFL player, at least at this point in time for me, because with Gibbs, you have to worry about David Montgomery coming back, and he's got extended by the team, so he's going to be there for a number of years. Achane is a little bit undersized. Breece Hall's got some offensive concerns. Bijan has the best blend of offense, size, talent, speed, receiving ability. Everything is there for Bijan Robinson, which is why, as of now, he's the clear RB1 in Dynasty. Again, we'll see what happens where Jeanty goes and draft capital and that kind of thing, but we're only ranking players currently in the NFL right now. So Bijan, he's a top 15 player for me. I wouldn't normally take a running back that high, but when the dichotomy of the running back position is such that there's a couple guys that are that much better than the field, you kind of have to do it.
So since October 20th, he's had one game failing to crack at least 20 touches, and it was in a game where they lost 38-6 to the fucking It was in a game where they lost 38-6 to the Broncos.
Yeah, dude, he's averaged 21.6 PPR points since we told people to trade for him in week 6. He's been a legendary running back for the back half of the season, or more than the back half of the season. Week 6 to 16 is like a 10, 11 game sample size. So, I mean, I have no doubt in my mind that this guy is going to be a top 5 redraft pick every year for the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if we're going to say anybody's going to become what Saquon Barkley became with the Philadelphia Eagles this year, I wouldn't be shocked if Atlanta really just kept building their offensive line. We know Bijan Robinson is going to be involved in the passing game, and his goal line equity as of late, we're looking at what in the last, was that 6 games? He has seven total touchdowns.
Yeah. Like, I wouldn't normally say, hey, if you're a rebuilding team, you're looking for cornerstone assets. Like, normally you avoid the running back position. You go cheap at the running back position. You spend your second and third round rookie picks on the running back position, hoping you get the next Chase Brown or Bucky Irving or whoever. But Bijan's different, man. Bijan's young and he's extremely talented, and you can actually withstand a punt year or a punt year or two before you're ready to compete, because he's still going to only be like 24 years old, vying for his second contract by the time you're ready to compete.
And what have we learned from fantasy, and what have we learned from the NFL this year in particular? Yeah, sure. Running backs don't matter across the league. I understand when you're talking about average talents. But when you're talking about the select few guys that are just flat out better than the rest of the group, they have made a difference. Saquon Barkley has made a difference. Christian McCaffrey, before he dealt with his injuries on San Francisco, has made a difference. There are certain guys that, like any position, when you're getting an elite of an elite at a certain position, they provide you an advantage above all.
Yeah, and I mean, you could go even further to how Joe Mixon has affected the Texans this year, and how Josh Jacobs has affected the Packers this year, and even like Derrick Henry on the Ravens. Like, there's tons of options and examples that, like, when you're actually an elite dude, and Bijan absolutely is, you can make a difference there. So let's move down into the next tier. And for full disclosure, there's not a huge difference between the 3 first rounders and the next tier. The reason we have them a tier difference is because those guys are top 15 startup assets for us in consensus. And these guys are more so late seconds, maybe into the early third round range. But we have Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, Caleb Williams, Breece Hall, and CJ Stroud in this range. Now, a mixed bag of like risers and fallers from the beginning of the season. I mean, Gibbs, Achane, and Breece are just also elite running backs who there's a position group right now that doesn't have a whole lot of young elite guys, where all 4 of these dudes, Bijan, Gibbs, Achane, and Breece, are producing like RB1s, and they're under the age of 24. So that like automatically makes them the top of the running back position.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at Jahmyr Gibbs. This guy literally looks like Jamal Charles 2.0. If he had the backfield to himself, like we have seen in these last couple of weeks since David Montgomery tore his MCL, he's got the upside to be there with Bijan Robinson, or in fact, from a production standpoint, maybe even a tier of his own, because I really do feel like with the context of the Lions offense, with the receiving involvement as of late with no Montgomery, I mean, we have seen the Lions inherently throw the ball more. We have seen Gibbs being used as a receiver more out of the backfield. On top of that, like I said, from a pure rushing standpoint, he is as close to this age as Jamal Charles as we will see in the league. So you can't have him on the area with Bijan Robinson, because if David Montgomery is healthy, there is just simply too much of a difference in their respective workloads. Bijan Robinson being that guy that, despite having Tyler Algier, we know he's going to get 21, 22, 23 touches. Whereas with Jahmyr Gibbs, you're more so looking at that 16 to 18 range. However, from an environmental standpoint, there's not much else you can argue with Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, and like Achane kind of factors into the same range where, like, dude, since Tua's been back, he's got 20.6 PPR points per game. And then in the first 2 games of the season when Tua was healthy, 23 points and 29.5. Like, actually, if you really wanted to nitpick here, you could make the argument that Achane's RB2 in Dynasty, because
76 receptions.
He's been insanely productive as a receiver. And all the while, by the way, not actually being that efficient on the ground. Like,
well, it's so funny because I remember going from the offseason, we even had these arguments a couple of times with Devon Achane, like, oh, if he's just not the clear-cut most efficient running back in the league, like, what happens? Well, what we have seen happen is the Dolphins can't run the ball, but you know what they're supplementing for that lack of a running game? Texas screens with Devon Achane, flare routes with Devon Achane. We saw a fucking Devon Achane line up on the outside and run a post yesterday, man.
Yeah, he's an insanely talented receiver, man. He's the RB7 in points per game this year with 18.4. And like I said, there was a dark, dark time of Miami Dolphins football for 5 or 6 games there. So he's been insanely productive. He's just, 23, 24 years old as well. So he's got to be up here. I'm not concerned really about Raheem Mostert or Jalen Wright. Yeah, they're going to probably factor into the backfield the next couple of years, but Achane's the dude, clearly.
He's different. And it's so funny looking back on it that there was legitimate concerns of how Raheem Mostert bowl prediction was going to outscore him.
Yo, dude, every slappy fantasy analyst was like, why would I ever draft Devon Achane when I can draft the same projection 8 rounds later or whatever people were saying? So, I mean, hopefully you guys listened to us. And I was actually one of those slappies for a little bit.
I convinced you, though. I
wasn't
you.
saying draft Raheem Mostert because he's a better projection than Devon Achane. I was just more so worried about Achane versus the other guys in his relative range, outscoring him. But regardless, man, like he's taken the step from a workload standpoint. Maybe they dial him back going forward, being like, hey, it's actually a little bit better if he gets a bit less touches.
Based on how Mike McDaniels talked, bro, that does not sound like a thing in their plans. Every time you hear him talk about Devon Achane, it's how can we get the ball in Devon Achane's hands more?
Yeah, that doesn't shock me either. And Breece Hall, I mean, we can quickly just talk about him. He was, I believe, my RB1 in Dynasty going into the season. He's had the worst run out of these 4 guys because, the Rodgers situation hasn't been great. And he's been dealing with an injury, I guess, like the last 3 or 4 weeks or whatever. But when healthy, I mean, he's been an 18.5 PPR point per game scorer this year, 16 overall. So he's producing like a back end RB1, but it's not the level of production that we thought we were getting. Like you and I both thought, hey, this is a dude that can threaten 100 targets, can threaten 15 touchdowns. We haven't quite seen that yet. And hopefully that corrects itself. I still believe in the talent of Breece Hall. It's just he hasn't quite looked to the level that he was last year himself, and the offense, it wasn't as good as we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I mean, he's averaging, 0.4 yards per carry less. The offensive line hasn't played as well, but also Breece Hall himself has not been the same type of player in the open field. And you're also looking at the receiving usage. I mean, you had a guy like Devontae Adams who's going to command nearly 30% of the targets. Obviously, Garrett Wilson going to command his own targets in his own right. We have seen the receiving usage go down. Again, not overall from a target perspective. 95 targets in 17 games last year versus 70 and 14, pretty comparable. However, we are seeing the overall efficiency as a wide receiver go down, specifically to less touchdowns, 9 touchdowns last year, 7 this year. I do feel like it's a little bit overstated how bad he's been because he's had a couple low points this year, but we have seen, for example, that Seattle game, I believe, where he had over 30 PPR points. So we have seen the upside. It's just, he hasn't put it together as consistently as Devon Achane, as Jahmyr Gibbs has, which is why even though he should be considered in this tier in relation to the other running backs not named those other 3, he has to be the 4th of that group.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why he was my RB1 going into the year was because his range of outcomes was tighter than Bijan's, than Achane's, and then Gibbs. Because if, let's say, Bijan is having the season that Breece is having right now, and Breece is having the season that Bijan is having right now, I think we'd be talking about Bijan lesser than we're talking about Breece currently. I just think that's the way that sometimes these guys hold their value a little bit more. And Stroud in this very tier is the precise example of this. Like Stroud is objectively not having that good of a season, but because of how good of a prospect he was and how good of a rookie season he had, he's still going to hold quite a bit of value as a result of that. Because it's never going to be as clean of a projection as, let's say, Travis Kelce in his prime, where it's tight end 1, tight end 1, tight end 1 every single year. It's normally going to be like, oh, you get Breece Hall, who's going to be this like great multi-time RB1. Well, he's going to have a year where he finishes RB15 in points per game, but then he's going to be RB4 in points per game the next year. And then he's going to flip-flop maybe RB8 in points per game. Maybe he has an RB1 overall season. Like it's not going to be simply Breece Hall's RB1 in points per game, RB1 in points per game, RB1 in points per game, RB1 in points per game. Otherwise, he's wearing a gold jacket someday.
Yeah, exactly. I think that pretty much sums it up. So those are the running backs in this tier. Now we can talk about the quarterbacks, and people might be saying this, well, CJ Stroud, look what he did as a rookie, this and that. Like, how do you guys as a collective have Caleb Williams over him? Let's do a blind resume test for this year, because that'll just show you how much liquidity that CJ Stroud has, the fact that he even is in this tier at this point. Caleb Williams is a rookie, keep that in mind. CJ Stroud is a second-year player. CJ Stroud throwing to Nico Collins. Caleb Williams, again, I like DJ Moore, I like Keenan Allen, I like Rome Odunze. You put a Nico Collins in that offense, we're talking a different story. One of them, 314 for 505, 3,271 passing yards, 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 442 rushing yards. The other one, 313 for 495, 3,492 passing yards, 19 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 226 rushing yards. Caleb Williams is the first player. CJ Stroud is the second player. Caleb Williams has outperformed CJ Stroud with an objectively worse offensive line and not a Nico Collins in that receiving core.
And no future head coach running the plays either, because we all thought Bobby Slowick was going to get head coaching jobs last year. He's objectively not had as good of a year as he did last year, but I mean, like Matt Eberflus was the coach of the Chicago Bears.
Shane Waldron was calling their offense for what, 70% of the year?
Yeah, no, like, are we going to sit here and pretend that Caleb Williams is the sure bet to become a superstar fantasy quarterback? No, but he was also an elite prospect. And
Yeah.
the bear case is factored in with the fact that we have him ranked at the end of the second round, as opposed to saying, oh, yeah, like he's a first round startup pick still. Like that would be foolish, I think, if we were saying that. We think his offensive coaching hire should, elevate his production a little bit. Hopefully they go out and get the right guy, whether that's Ben Johnson
Liam
or whoever is available in the NFL coaching landscape. Caleb Williams should have a better time as a second-year player, like most rookie quarterbacks do, for what it's worth, than he did this rookie season. And like you just mentioned, when you actually really look at it, 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 400 rushing yards, like that's not that bad.
Yeah. And again, like he's had his points this year where you'll watch and be like, no, Caleb, no. Like he hasn't thrown an interception in 2 months. Like I don't think people have realized that.
Yeah, he's been a little sloppy with the football in the pocket. He takes some bad sacks. The vibe check of like DJ Moore looking frustrated with the quarterback, like that's not good. You don't want to see that.
No.
But if people are like panicked selling him for a singular first round pick or something, like go buy this dude.
Well, and it comes back to, again, I think CJ Stroud is a likelier bet to get out of his slump than Caleb Williams. I think that's fair. But also, if they both live up to their upside, Caleb Williams has more rushing upside. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, he does. And again, the weapons group, we don't know how long Keenan Allen's going to be there, but Rome Odunze objectively has had an okay but not good rookie season as well. Like what happens if like this offseason we get a million think pieces of Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze training every day together, and both of them look like different players their second season? Because I still believe in both
really
players.
Top talents. Yeah, really top talents as prospects. So again, that could very well be the case. And also too, situation matters so much for these young guys. When you're involved in an environment with Matt Eberflus not setting a culture, with Shane Waldron not calling good offense. I mean, realistically, we watched the Chicago Bears offense in the first 8 weeks of the year. What was the first thing I said to you? Caleb Williams has to think he has to create out of structure, because there is no structure to the Bears offense. You're watching Shane Waldron fail to scheme up good looks in structure for Caleb Williams. So what does he feel like he has to do? I have to extend plays. I have to create out of structure because that's the only way I can move the football. That's a bad thing to put into a young player's head. You need structure. You need, whether it's, again, a Liam Cohn coming over from Tampa Bay or Ben Johnson hiring into the division. Whatever the case may be, the Bears need to go out there, hire an offensive-minded head coach, make Caleb feel comfortable, because that is the way he can grow in structure.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it's just, rookie quarterback, you learn a lot more in the offseason. You go back to the tape, you realize what you did wrong, you realize what you got to get better. Caleb Williams, I think he's mentally tough enough to figure out that stuff and come back stronger the second season. So it is more of a bet on the player and the prospect and what we've seen, pre rookie season, but we've also seen a lot of good in the rookie season. Like you said, the Jacksonville game come to mind, second half games against Detroit a couple of weeks back were really good performances. So there's a lot of hope here. It's just, try and parse through and dig through the weeds of what actually matters. So there's a massive tier here of like guys who are valued as like 2 first rounders, some wide receivers, 1 tight end, a couple quarterbacks here. We'll try and skim through this as quick as we can, just because I don't want to go through and spend 5 minutes on every single one of these players. But very simply, I mean, Drake London took the step we all thought he was going to, right? He got a quarterback upgrade, even though Cousins hasn't been perfect and Penix is a rookie now. He has been better than he had been in previous years. He's finishing as like a top 12 receiver right now, having only produced like wide receiver 3 numbers before that with great peripherals. So that's all great. Harrison, well, that's a separate discussion. We'll wait for a second on that. JSN, great second season. We thought he was a great prospect. He didn't really have a great rookie year. He comes out and he's the PPR scam that we all thought he was going to be. Lad McConkey is basically just JSN as a rookie, or basically just Amon-Ra St. Brown as a rookie, tethered to Justin Herbert, a great, well-coached team, great quarterback, not a lot of weapons. Maybe they add somebody, but I feel pretty good about all those guys. And then Garrett Wilson, similar to Breece Hall, just hasn't taken the step that we all thought. We all thought he was such a nails projection, and the offense has been so dysfunctional, so disorganized. The problem with both Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson is like you kind of have to hopium your way into thinking things will get better, because there's no substantial evidence.
There's no clear proof that it will.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you got to hope, okay, what are the Jets going to do at quarterback? Are they going to roll back with Aaron Rodgers? Or are they maybe draft a Jalen Milroe round 2? Like, we don't have the answers right now. I think Garrett Wilson and I think Breece Hall are very talented football players that can bounce back, and they have shown they can be productive in suboptimal situations. But until their situations are optimal, you can't rank them any higher than we do, to be honest.
Yeah, and like the whole point of this video is cornerstone assets. You're rebuilding a dynasty team. In an ideal world, you have very little risk when it comes to your cornerstone foundational players. So these guys specifically are less applicable to the concept of rebuilding a cornerstone team. You would rather somebody like Jackson Smith-Njigba, who has maybe a slightly lower ceiling than Garrett Wilson, but he has more insulation in the offense that he's a part of. Or maybe you prefer Puka Nacua because he's a safer projection or something like that. So again, these are cornerstone dynasty rankings. They're under 25-year-old players for rebuilding dynasty teams, but do factor in like the range of outcomes with some of these guys. Some of them are riskier than others.
For what it's worth too, JSN's the guy that I kept trying to put higher than I have. Again, I still think there's a little bit of risk level. Maybe DK Metcalf starts playing better moving forward. But I mean, if I'm going to make excuses for how productive JSN has been, I'm looking at it wrong because like Amon St. Brown in the past, when a young player shows this level of improvement, but specifically for JSN going from his first to second year, we have to take notice. The guy has 1,100 yards this year. And since I believe it was week 8, he's gone over 69 plus receiving yards in every single game. We could be looking back at this after the year and saying, well, why didn't we have JSN at the very minimum in the tier with Gibbs and HN?
Yeah, we absolutely could be looking at that. The one thing I also kind of want to say about Garrett Wilson too is I know we called him this going into the summer and it was premature because he didn't have this type of season, but like his career trajectory just is so much like Lamb's. It's insane because the expectation for Lamb as a rookie was come out gangbusters, be a dominant player. Didn't really do that because Dak got hurt and he had Cooper and Gallup to compete with. Then as a second-year player, he produces as a top 18 wide receiver in points per game, but you felt like he could have been better than that. You were like, maybe he should have been better than that. That's kind of what Garrett Wilson has been as a third-year wide receiver this year. Yeah. And then his third year, 17.7 PPR points per game. That was wide receiver 7. But we're like, okay, well, is he ever going to have 20 point per game upside? And that's kind of what Garrett Wilson has been this year. He's wide receiver 8 in fantasy right now. He's only averaging 15 points per game. But would it shock me totally if in his 4th NFL season, he goes out there and has the CeeDee Lamb 2023 season? It wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't shock me. I'm not saying it's extremely likely. I'm saying it wouldn't shock me.
See, the difference is that CeeDee Lamb's second year is very comparable to Garrett Wilson's third year. And it was easier to project with Lamb because we saw flashes of it and could at least convince.
I think we've seen consistent flashes of it. But
let me finish, because with Garrett Wilson, whether Devontae Adams is here or not, the situation can't really get better because we've seen him perform and not perform with Devontae Adams on or off his team. With CeeDee Lamb in particular, we knew Amari Cooper was going to be gone, and that was the only stretch that we saw with CeeDee Lamb performing. On top of that, CeeDee Lamb's third year, he had 107 receptions and 1,359 receiving yards. If Garrett Wilson had that type of year this year, I would say, okay, maybe he has that 1,700-yard, 12-plus touchdown year in the range of outcomes. There's no Dak Prescott I can lean on, though.
Yeah, that's the difference. Is like Rodgers would probably have to stay in that scenario and play as good as Dak played in 2023 for that to be a possibility for Garrett Wilson. Yeah. My point is just that, like, I think people might write off.
There's more meat on the bone here.
Yeah, I think my point is that people might write off Garrett Wilson, and if they do, then you should be buying him. And let's talk about the Cardinals duo here, because Harrison objectively has been disappointing this year. Like if you guys drafted Marvin Harrison in the first round or the early second round of your startup, of your redraft league, wherever you had to spend a pick on him, 102 of your rookie draft, you thought you were getting a better player than what you got, because he's only averaging 0.3 points less than Calvin Ridley. Like he's been like a wide receiver 3 this year. Like he has not been the wide receiver 1 we all thought we were getting. I'm the pro Harrison guy of the two of us. Yeah. So I'll give the pro Harrison take for a second. The way I look at it is kind of similar to Caleb Williams. I don't think Drew Petzig has schemed him up very well. I think he's using him as an X receiver, and defenses know how to take away an X receiver. They put their number 1 corner on him. They shadow him over the top. There's absolutely nobody else at wide receiver that scare you for the Arizona Cardinals other than Trey McBride and James Conner, the tight end and the running back. So I think they're going to get a good, hard look at Marvin Harrison this offseason, make adjustments. I think Drew Petzing can do that. I just think Harrison needs to be used a little bit better. And objectively, he needs to play better than he's played. And he's looked like a rookie receiver. Brian Thomas and Malik Nabers haven't looked like rookie receivers, which is why we're elevating them so much. But we also conversely have to punish Marvin Harrison for the same thing, looking like a rookie receiver.
Yeah, and I think that's the easiest way to sum it up. I actually do have JSN ranked higher than Marv, but at the same time, I have Marv still as my 28th overall player because, like you said, there is still a ceiling upside here where he's a first-round starter pick. I'm not going to get that out of the way. However, I mean, he's a very volatile asset. If he goes out there in his second year and he has another disappointing year, that tether to that 4th overall draft capital is going to be waning every single year that he doesn't produce. So he's riskier. He's more volatile than some of the other wide receivers in this range, which is why I have a JSN, which is why I have a Drake London. Obviously, those other guys you see on the screen ahead of him. But at the same time, there is still untapped upside that he can fully break out. And that's why I still slightly prefer him. Again, I love Ladd McConkey. I think Ladd McConkey is a stud. I think Ladd McConkey figures to be a top 15 PPR wide receiver really throughout his career. I mean, we're already seeing as a rookie, 960 yards, 5 receiving touchdowns. He has played in 14 of the 15 games for the Chargers. And as we know, he is tethered to Justin Herbert. However, if both had 1,200 yards next year, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be a first-round starter pick. Ladd McConkey is going to be a second-rounder. So because there's a little bit more accumulation upside for Marvin Harrison Jr., because of the talent, because of the size, because of the versatility playing inside out, I do think the market's going to prefer him if they both have great years. But that's not to take anything away from Ladd McConkey. He is only 2 spots behind Marv. And if somebody said, yeah, I would much rather have Ladd McConkey to Marvin Harrison Jr., I don't think that's outlandish at all.
Yeah, I think the difference between these two guys this year has been consistency as far as what they've looked like week over week. Because when you look at like the high end, how they hit your best ball lineup kind of numbers, they've both had 6 games above 16 PPR points. They've both had 2 games above 20. They both have 1 game where they finish as a top 3 receiver on the week. So like from a spike week standpoint, they've objectively been about the same. Obviously the cost was different. So people have that in their mind a little bit. But on a consistent basis, you have McConkey churning out 11.4 on his down weeks or 9.7 or whatever. You know what I mean? Like he's not been a bum on like half of his games like Marvin Harrison has.
Yeah, 100%. Again, if you want to argue Ladd versus Marvin Harrison, be my guest. Again, we personally believe that Marv has more accumulation upside given both had a big year, but that is very subjective. And I mean, we already talked about Marv basically funneling targets to his teammate because defenses are taking him away. Well, his teammate also deserves to be in this tier. Trey McBride, again, he is technically 25 years old, but given the context of the tight end position, he is the clear number 2 option out of Brock Bowers. So we felt appropriate that we should be putting him into this list. It's pretty simple, man. Volume, volume, volume. This guy soaks volume for a living.
Yeah, he's been outstanding from a volume standpoint. Like, it's really hard to have no touchdowns. I mean, he has 1 because he recovered a fumble in the end zone, but 14.3 PPR points without scoring a receiving touchdown is an incredible number, man. If he had 6 touchdowns, like he probably would on most given years, given the volume that he's receiving right now, you're talking about a guy that's averaging like 17 PPR points per game right now, which is like Travis Kelce numbers. Like we're talking legit number 1 tight end type of dude. You don't have a 27% target share and be just like, oh, there's nobody else in the offense, so that's why they're throwing it to him. No. If there was no one else in the offense and they were just throwing it to him for that reason, he'd have like a 19% target share or like a 20% target share, and he'd be tight end 8 in points per game, not tight end 3 without a touchdown.
Yeah, I think you pretty much summed it up. And then obviously the final 2 on this list, we already talked about the rest of the names. Bo Nix, Brock Purdy. It's kind of funny because it almost feels like Bo Nix is the new Brock Purdy in the sense that both have their question marks, both have their detractors in terms of how exactly talented they are in relation to some of the other quarterbacks in the class, but you can't argue the production. And we know for both of these guys, Brock Purdy is going to sign a $55+ million extension to remain a 49er. We know Bo Nix is going to be tethered to Sean Payton in that Broncos offense. I mean, facts, in his first year as a starter, they're already 9-6 in the playoff hunt. Yeah, sure. Do they have the ceiling from a market perspective that a Caleb Williams, that a CJ Stroud, that a Drake Maye, that a Jayden Daniels do? No, because people are always going to talk about the talent level. But if you're telling me you can get a consistent top 12 to 15 quarterback in fantasy in the 3rd round of your startups, which is where these guys are going, sign me up.
Yeah, like Brock Purdy, I'm trying to look right now. In every one of Brock Purdy's seasons as a starter, he's been like an 18 PPR point per game quarterback, which is like not quite an elite quarterback, but it's a very good, consistent, every week starting quarterback. And Bo Nix, in his only season so far, has 18.1 PPR points. And I would argue, too, that like there's a lot more upside for Bo Nix because he runs more than Purdy. And also, they got nothing at receiver right now. Like it's Cortland Sutton is like one of the no offense to Cortland Sutton, he's one of the weaker number one receivers in the NFL, in my opinion. And they have Devon Achane and Troy Franklin and like other like no tight end to speak of, no good running back.
You know it's an issue. You know it's an issue when you're prized a young upside receiver is a 27-year-old rookie.
Yeah, like it's bad, man. Like if they add a great receiver in the draft, like they hit on Emeka Egbuka in the first round or something like that, or maybe they grab one in the second round and they somehow get Genty or something falling to them in the first round. Like two big time playmakers on the offensive side of the ball, whether it's a young tight end, a young receiver, a young running back, would go a long way for Bo Nix and a long way for the Denver Broncos. So I feel pretty good that Bo Nix can still accumulate a little bit more value, but the production is nice. I mean, 18 PPR points. He's a top 10 quarterback in fantasy right now.
You want to hear something that's going to throw you for a loop?
What's that?
Brock Purdy is nearly exactly 2 months older than Bo Nix.
Yeah, like that's the problem with Nix a little bit too, is that like if he was a 21-year-old rookie doing this right now, he'd probably have more accumulation potential. Like the bandwidth of how much more left there is for him to be a ceiling of a player is smaller because he's an older prospect versus like Malik Nabers, for example, who couldn't drink alcohol at training camp in his first year.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is actually hilarious.
So that's where we're at with Nix. Again, he's a great player. I have him, I think, as like a top 40 asset. So yeah, he's like a third round startup pick, like mid to late third round, early fourth round, quarterback heavy room, 6 point per passing touchdown leagues. Maybe you bump him up a little bit more than that, but I wouldn't go crazy with Nix. If you think he's like a second round pick all of a sudden, like you got to rank the second round before you say something like that.
Well, exactly. I mean, even the guys in this tier, I just don't really think you can make a case for having Bo Nix over them. In fact, I mean, again, I like Bo Nix, but we haven't talked about, for example, guys like, I know Trevor Lawrence doesn't fit into this, but like Trevor Lawrence's of the world, the Baker Mayfields of the world, Dak Prescott when he's healthy, JJ McCarthy, we'll talk about in a second, Jared Goff, Michael Penix Jr. Like, there's a big middle tier of quarterbacks that I can't personally put Bo Nix in the Kyler Murray, CJ Stroud and above area, but I think he's more of, like Brock Purdy, the head of the next tier of the quarterbacks 13 and 19 or so in Dynasty.
Yeah, and we were talking about it before we started recording, but like the difference now in the middle class of quarterback versus just 2 years ago, if you guys remember this, Daniel Jones was the keep trade cut quarterback 15 2 years ago. 2 years ago, he was the quarterback 15 on the keep trade cut. And it wasn't even that outrageous. He had a top 12 season. The Giants made the playoffs. They beat the Vikings in the playoffs.
Just signed a $40 million contract.
Yeah, there was no middle class at quarterback. Like the Tuas and the Jordan Loves and the Bo Nixes, they didn't exist at the time. So now we're at a position where that downgrades the first round quarterbacks that are not giving you difference making production, like CJ Stroud, like Patrick Mahomes, like, you know, Kyler Murray, like Justin Herbert, guys like that. And it upgrades the third, fourth, fifth round area of a super flex startup where you have way more quarterbacks than just like when people were doing startups that year. Like if you didn't have Daniel Jones, like you were scrambling for the next quarterback.
Oh, dude, like it was insane. It's like, do I take Aaron Rodgers in round 5?
Yeah,
like, that was the
like,
conversation people had.
I mean, some of those guys bumped up, like Geno Smith and Jared Goff and Baker Mayfield. Some of those guys were picked in that area and they got higher in value. But like we didn't know that was coming. Like they could have very easily turned into Derek Carr.
Yeah, that's not a good place to be. But we could move on as the honorable mentions real quick.
We do have a couple more guys that were just after this tier to close out our top 25. Let's just quickly rattle through these guys, and then we'll just show the honorable mentions, and we won't even talk about them really because we're going a little long on this. But Pickens, McCarthy, Zay Flowers, and Chase Brown close out our top 25 under 25, basically. With Pickens, he's been really talented, but the quarterback situation long-term is something we're not sure of. I think probably Russell Wilson would be the quarterback again next year, if I had to guess right now.
Yeah, I would say that's probably their best bet. I mean, he's played pretty well for them. And in fact, if you're telling me that Russell Wilson is the quarterback for George Pickens, I think not only is this very fair, I think you can even make the case with him and like Garrett Wilson, because we saw the split with Russell Wilson George Pickens be a legit wide receiver 1. So again, a little bit more risk, not as much of a volume dependent guy, which as in a PPR league, you do want the volume, but I do think George Pickens has really showed himself to be a clear-cut wide receiver 1 in the NFL, which is the step that we needed to see from him, to be honest. We had some concerns coming into the year. He definitely showed up to be that type of player. JJ McCarthy is the biggest wild card in Dynasty right now, because we talked about Bo Nix, Brock Purdy. Maybe they're at their ceiling in terms of what their market value is. JJ McCarthy, in a year's time, can either be a top 15 startup pick or a 6th round startup pick. That's pretty much how I view him. Because with JJ McCarthy, again, I think it's more likely he's going to be the former, because I do believe in the talent. I do believe in the mobility. I do believe he has, B+, A- type of arm talent. And we have seen Sam Darnold produce MVP level numbers for this Vikings offense. You have Justin Jefferson. You have TJ Hawkinson. You have Jordan Addison. You have what's been a really solid offensive line. If JJ McCarthy is the prospect I thought him to be, again, he was my QB4 in the class. I thought he was worth the top 10 overall pick.
It's difficult to know for sure if we're doing the thing again where we're just like, great landing spot for this quarterback. Let's elevate him. It's Trey Lance. It's like me and you did it with Zach Wilson. We were just so excited about the receivers that he had.
I think McCarthy's different, man. His mentality is so much different than those guys.
It is, but like, I think you could make the argument those guys were like equally as good of prospects as JJ McCarthy. Yeah. So that's why we can't just go nuts here and be like, yeah, JJ McCarthy's like,
even if I want to.
Yeah, like we can't just be like, yeah, he's like the 21st ranked player in my rankings. No, like we got to rank him in like the 4th round or something. But like you said, there's the upside that what we've seen from what Kevin O'Connell did with Sam Darnold, a guy that got, blown out in Carolina, journeyman in San Francisco the last couple of years. Like he hasn't really been anything until this year when he's producing MVP numbers. It's dangerous to just copy and paste that onto JJ McCarthy. But at the same time, it gives you a lot of hope that O'Connell can work with him. Also,
is it crazy to say that I don't want to say a raw quarterback, more so just raw from an overall volume perspective in college? Because again, we know the story about JJ McCarthy as a prospect. He wasn't asked to do as much from a volume perspective as some of those other quarterbacks were in last year's class. But the reason why I liked him, maybe even a little bit more than you, but I know you liked him as well. When they needed to make a play, 3rd and long, JJ McCarthy was the best quarterback in college football last year. So again, while the volume isn't up there with, Michael Penix, how many times he was throwing the ball, or Bo Nix, how many times he was throwing the ball, I also think learning behind Sam Darnold in a year that was a lost year from an injury perspective was probably the best thing for his mental. Again, you don't want to rush a 21-year-old quarterback who maybe doesn't have the most volume. You put him behind a vet like Sam Darnold, who's having an MVP caliber year, and we do know Kevin O'Connell. I mean, if he doesn't win Coach of the Year at this point, I'd be extremely shocked.
Well, yeah, not only that, but Darnold has been the guy before and washed out of New York and washed out of Carolina. And he's also like the perfect type of guy to teach you how to be mentally tough in the NFL. Be like, hey, I was once like you. I was the kid that everybody thought was going to save the franchise. And this is where I am now. I'm on my 4th NFL team or whatever. So pay attention here. Like when I tell you, like, don't do this or whatever, like Darnold in that locker room is a great dynamic. And one thing that I'm a little bit worried about, I'm not saying that the Vikings are going to sign Sam Darnold long-term. I don't think that's going to happen. But if you were Minnesota's GM, are you just going to let him walk in free agency? I would franchise tag him and try and trade him. That's what I would do.
Yeah. Which again, regardless, I don't think there's a scenario next year where both Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy are on the active Vikings roster. Again, I don't think they're going to trade JJ McCarthy because you draft them in the top 10. I think it's much more likely that you would trade Sam Darnold. But also, let's keep in mind, what type of comp pick would they get? Would they get an end of the 2nd round pick if Sam Darnold signed a $50 million year?
No, it's not. It's not possible in the comp pick formula to get more than a 3rd.
Is it not?
No, it's not. So that's
why
I
thought they added 2nd rounders to the formula.
Did they? Okay. Well, if they did, then that's definitely a factor. But to me, like, I think you would get more if you tag and traded him as opposed to just letting him walk. That's why I'm like, I don't think, I think it's like a very close to 0 chance that they're both on the roster in Minnesota starting week 1 next year. But I don't think it's 0 that it happens.
And I think that's a very valid take to have. And in fact, that's another reason why you can't put him in the top 25 area. But with that being said, I mean, do I think JJ McCarthy is going to be, he's Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson? No. But can he be, if he hits a ceiling, similar to Joe Burrow? Again, not saying he's going to be Joe Burrow, but can he be 85% of Joe Burrow? Again, similar size, similar arm talent. You got a little bit of that other structure ability. Again, it is a projection, but basically what I'm trying to say is if he goes out there and has a big season, the market is going to be treating him like the next Joe Burrow.
Yeah, I know it's hard for people to envision until something happens, but would it shock any of us if his numbers at the same age and actually a little bit younger as a second-year quarterback who didn't start his first year were the same as the quarterback we talked about in 2 tiers ahead, who have similar play styles. They could both play that backyard scrambling style quarterbacks. Him and Caleb Williams could have very similar seasons as second-year quarterbacks.
I thought you were saying, could he have a similar season to what CJ Stroud has as a rookie? I thought that's what you're implying.
No, I was talking about Caleb, like what we're projecting out of Caleb. What if JJ does it his second year?
Yeah, he very well could. Again, wild card for sure, but anytime this guy falls out of the top 36 overall, he's the guy I'm taking chances on in my startup because, like I said, accumulation potential. You want to pair him with a Geno Smith or somebody like that later on for more security, go ahead. But if you grab, let's just say in the first round or second round, you grab a Jordan Love or a Justin Herbert or a Joe Burrow or somebody like that, and you want to grab JJ McCarthy as your upside quarterback too, and like I said, pair them with a Geno Smith type later in your draft, I think that's my most ideal way of making a quarterback structure in a startup now.
Yeah, because as we talked about already, we're more likely to go at the wide receiver, running back, and tight end positions early in startups, which is, previously we were like, we better get 2 quarterbacks in the first 3 rounds or we're going to be screwed at that position. Zay Flowers, I mean, there's not much to say about him. 13.5 PPR points per game this year. Wide receiver 15 in overall scoring, a little bit less than that. Wide receiver 20-something, I believe, in PPR points per game. He's been a little bit up and down, but I talked about this, and I still can't get this comparison out of my head. When I was going into the summer and I was talking about breakout candidates and stuff like that, I brought up the Jalen Waddle career trajectory for Zay Flowers, and he's precisely doing exactly what Jalen Waddle did as a second-year player, which was Waddle was like a mid-wide receiver too. He had 15 PPR points per game, and I think that's what Zay Flowers will probably have about when it's all said and done. And he's been some games he's disappeared, but for the most part, he's been relatively consistent and had a couple spike weeks. So for me, for a young receiver who's 24 years old to be tethered to Lamar Jackson and produce like a wide receiver too, this is about where he belongs for me.
Yeah. Again, you have him a little bit higher than I do, but ultimately here he does deserve a spot in this area. The main difference would be I would have the next guy we're talking about along with your boy Bucky Irving as my last 2 players. We could just talk about Chase Brown. I mean, shout out Canada. Who would have known? I mean, this guy literally grew up in London, played against the lad back in the day. I mean, obviously, I always got to make reference when I play against one of these guys. If you guys weren't around the channel when I was talking about John Mechie, it's an inside joke. All jokes aside, though, Chase Brown, London, Ontario native, goes over, I believe, initially to Western Michigan, transfers to Illinois. We liked him as a prospect. We thought he was a good all-around running back. Ends up falling to, I believe, round 5 in the NFL draft. We see last year behind Joe Mixon, not a lot of opportunity. But since week 9, this guy's been the starting running back. He didn't start as the main bell cow running back for 8 weeks. And he has, 1,400 yards from scrimmage?
Yeah, he's been insanely good since taking over the starting job. When you look at the week he took over the starting job was week 9, like you said. From week 9 until now, he has 22 PPR points per game. He's been an abject workhorse. He played every snap but 2 last week.
Yeah,
he's been insane. He's been absolutely insane. The question, and why we can't rank him higher than this, is if he was a second-round running back, he'd be the running back 2 or 3 or 4 in Dynasty right now.
He'd be higher than Breece Hall, I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, exactly. But we can't do that because he was a day 3 pick. So we're worried, just like we were for Kyron last year, just like we've been for other running backs in the past. At Kyron, it didn't really matter as much because he was able to overcome the Blake Corum draft pick, at least to this point in time. Chase Brown, probably similar trajectory as Kyron Williams, but at the same time, you got to be worried a little bit that what if he gets Gentied? What if he gets Hamptoned? What if he gets, one of these absolute big time high draft capital backs gets added?
Yeah. And again, the other guy that I would have on this list, it's not really a risk that he will get Gentied per se, but we do know that Rachaad White already exists as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. He's not going anywhere because I saw on Twitter, by the way, people were like, why is Rachaad White in the 2-minute drill? Maybe because he's a really good pass blocker and a really good receiver to the backfield. Like, guys, you do realize that just because Bucky is the better fantasy football running back doesn't mean that both are not extremely valuable to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. We got to get that out of the way. But I mean, what we've seen from Bucky Irving, he's been one of the 5 most efficient runners in the NFL this year.
Yeah, he's been phenomenal. And he's limited because he's small and he's not going to get more than 250 touches in a season. Like, I'll guarantee you he doesn't next year. Yeah. Like, everybody's going to be like, oh, he's going to just do what Devon Achane did. Todd Bowles is old school, man. He's not going to give a small running back more than 225, 250 touches, but that's great because that's what Bucky Irving needs to be used as. And he needs to be the new Devon Achane, Jahmyr Gibbs, Alvin Kamara, these like smaller running backs that need to be used in a certain way, Bucky's going to be used that way. And I don't think we're going to address the running back position. I'm not really even concerned about that at all, to be honest. I just think Rachaad White is going to be more involved than other people think. Yeah, and Tucker is good too.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that aspect. Like, again, does he have his warts as a player, Rachaad White? Sure. But he's been more efficient as a runner this year. And as we know, he's a great pass blocker and a great receiver. Both can be true. We could be excited about Bucky Irving in fantasy while also acknowledging that Rachaad White's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and Rachaad White is literally a top 22 running back this year in points per game. Like he might be like one of the biggest steals in best ball next year if he's like an 11th round pick or something like that. You know what I mean? Like he might be just as valuable as like some of the number 2 backs that we saw go high this year, like David Montgomery or, whoever else. And you made reference to Bucky Irving because he was one of the guys that just missed to you. I still think Rashee Rice has just as much upside to be all the way up near Marvin Harrison, JSN, Drake London, those type of guys in the wide receiver rankings. Once he's healthy, once he's back on the field, potentially from a suspension. Thankfully, the knee injury was a little bit less invasive of a procedure than we thought. It's not like a full-blown multi-ligament ACL tear that's going to take as much rehab. So I feel really good about him still. Sam Laporta, very young tight end, had one of the best rookie seasons at the tight end position. Kyron, we made reference to already. And then you have other guys who are just good young receivers like Jaden Reed and Xavier Worthy and Romo Dunze and Jordan Addison and Josh Downs, who aren't quite to the level of some of these guys, although you could make the argument that some of them maybe even be ahead of Zay Flowers or George Pickens. I wouldn't, but you could make that argument. Yeah,
no, I'd agree with you in that. But overall, again, we are going to make it top 25, under 25. Realistically, we talked about 30 names there. So hopefully you guys got a ton of value.
Yeah, and as always, me and Danny said, hey, like 30 minutes we'll make this video, and it never ends up being 30 minutes. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you got some value from this video, if you feel like you got some good pieces to go after for maybe your rebuilding dynasty teams or whatever, if there was one guy on this top 25 under 25 that is the best rebuilding trade target, who would it be in your opinion?
Rebuilding,
because that's the point of it.
JJ McCarthy.
JJ McCarthy. Okay. I thought you were going to go Drake Maye because he's.
Fair. Yeah. Sorry. I assumed you meant a guy that like isn't at the clear top. Drake Maye, based off where we have him versus the market, I completely agree. But the reason why I say JJ McCarthy is that I think the market is also going to be lower on him than we are.
Yeah, I don't disagree with either of those two names. I'm willing to take the plunge on Harrison, bouncing back as a second-year player. So he would be one of the guys that I would say is one of the better rebuilding ones. And I'm also willing to take the plunge on Wilson too, on Garrett. Even though they're risky, I think the better options are probably the ones that you said as far as like risk tolerance level. But I am willing to take the plunge on those receivers.
Yeah, I think those are really good options as well. Because like we said, they are kind of valued at their low point right now. But we do know that there's quite the market ceiling if they do live up to expectations.
For sure. So that was our top 25 under 25. Again, if you yell at us in the comments and the player was over 25, I'm just going to tell you to Google how old they are, basically, is what I'm going to say. If you're like, where the hell is Justin Jefferson? It's like Justin Jefferson is over 25, so he's not on this list. But again, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Flockfantasy.com if you want our updated trade value chart, updated Superflex rankings. Use our trade calculator. Dynasty rookie draft guides coming out very, very soon. As soon as the offseason gets going, we're going to start watching these players, going to start grading these players. I know the domain guys already have like a preliminary draft guide out. I'm pretty sure the land guys will have theirs out pretty soon as well. So definitely check that out. All of that is available over on flockfantasy.com. And when you sign up with the promo code FSE, you get 30% off, 7 days for free, 6 months for free when you sign up annually. That would cover you from now until all the way to the end of next fantasy season, through the rookie cycle, through the dynasty cycle, through the redraft cycle, through the in-season stuff for one price there. So definitely check that out, and you get a free team review when you sign up. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.